A 22-year-old woman is in jail today because police say that she helped set up her roommates to be murdered. According to court documents, Jasmine Brown helped facilitate a double murder of her roommates at her Okolona apartment in September that left two young men dead. According to police, she was talking to three unknown co-defendants before the murders, saying, "Hey, go in, the door is unlocked, they are sleeping," and she left before the murders and then came back when the crime scene was active, saying, "I live there." Police say that jail phone call she made to one of the co-defendants corroborated her role in that shooting.
The night was quiet. Too quiet for a place that usually echoed with laughter, late-night music, and the ordinary rhythms of young people trying to build their own little corner of the world. Inside a small apartment on Napa Valley Court in Okolona, two young men rested after a long day. They were roommates, friends, brothers in spirit. 18-year-old Marion Caldwell and 19-year-old Kavion Faulkner. Two lives just beginning. Two futures full of possibility. But outside that door, something was shifting. It's strange how moments that feel peaceful can sit side by side with danger. How life can appear normal until suddenly it isn't. And on that night, while the sky stayed still and the neighborhood seemed to sleep, the pieces of a betrayal were already falling into place. A betrayal that didn't come from strangers. A betrayal that didn't come from outside. A betrayal that came from within the very home they trusted. Imagine this. Someone you live with, someone you share meals with, someone who knows when you're home, when you're gone, when you're awake, and when you're most vulnerable. Now imagine that person quietly becoming part of a plan, one that would change everything. Most stories of danger begin with warning signs. But for Marion and Kavion, the danger wasn't marked by loud arguments, threats, or chaos. It began with whispers, with conversations no one else heard, with decisions made far away from the eyes of the two boys, whose lives depended on trust. And the most chilling part, they had no reason to expect anything was wrong. The apartment lights were off. The night was calm. Nothing looked unusual. But while the two young men slept, messages had already been exchanged. Directions had already been given, and the person they believed they were safe around was communicating with others, setting the stage for something no one could ever take back. Minutes later, the quiet broke. By sunrise, the truth began to spill out. Someone close to them had played a role in what happened. Someone who knew the layout of the apartment, who knew who was inside, and who had access to information only an insider could provide. And as investigators pieced together phone records and conversations, a disturbing picture emerged. This wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't a moment of heated emotion. It was a setup. A setup so calculated, so cold, that even seasoned detectives would later describe the case as stunning in its level of betrayal. Two young lives were gone. A community was shaken. And the person accused was someone who once shared their space, their routines, their trust. Someone they never imagined could be connected to something like this. This is the story of Marion Caldwell and Kavion Faulkner, two teenagers caught in the crosshairs of a plan they never saw coming. A story that forces us to ask the question, how well do we really know the people we live with? And more importantly, what really happened inside that apartment on Napa Valley Court? Stay with me, because the truth behind this case is more unsettling than anyone expected. Welcome to Lat True Crime Stories. I am your host. Today we're breaking down one of the most twisted cases you've ever seen. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and leave your comment to tell us where you're watching from. Let's build this community together. Now let's get into it. Before the headlines, before the court documents, before anyone suspected that something was quietly unraveling inside a small apartment in Okolona, there was just life. Ordinary, everyday life. The apartment complex on Napa Valley Court wasn't glamorous, but it was home. It sat tucked between tall trees and rows of buildings that looked almost identical. The kind of place where neighbors nodded politely, where kids raced bicycles down the sidewalk, and where people worked hard simply to keep moving forward. Nothing about it suggested the kind of story that would later send shockwaves through Louisville. Inside one of those units lived three young adults. Marion Caldwell, just 18, with a personality that people described as bright and loyal. Kavion Faulkner, 19, soft-spoken but focused on building something for himself. and the woman who allowed them to stay there. Someone who shared the same rooms, the same kitchen, the same daily routines. They weren't wealthy. They weren't famous. They were regular young people navigating early adulthood, trying to figure out jobs, friendships, and what came next. They were doing what so many teenagers and young adults do, finding independence and leaning on each other for support. For Marion and Kavion, this apartment was a stepping stone, a place to breathe, to plan, to grow. And for a while, that's all it was meant to be. But even in ordinary places, cracks can form beneath the surface. Neighbors would later describe the apartment as quiet, nothing alarming, nothing chaotic, the kind of place where lights flickered at different hours, where laughter could sometimes be heard through the walls, and where life played out in simple, unremarkable ways. No one imagined that behind the scenes, tension might have been brewing. No one imagined that conversations were being held privately, conversations that others in the home weren't aware of. And no one imagined that someone inside the apartment could be speaking to people outside of it with intentions no one could guess. In the days leading up to the tragedy, nothing looked out of place. The young men still came and went. They still talked to friends. They still made plans for the future. They were teenagers stepping into adulthood, living in a space they believed they were welcome in. That belief, that sense of safety, would later become one of the most heartbreaking pieces of this story. Because the true danger in their lives wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a random threat lurking in the streets. It wasn't something they could have predicted or prepared for. It was inside their home. As investigators would eventually learn, phone records, messages, and earlier conversations hinted at intentions far darker than anything the victims knew. But in this moment before the alarms, before anyone understood what was coming, the lives inside that apartment looked like any other household of young adults trying to make it work. This is where the story begins. A simple apartment, 3 young people sharing space, trusting each other. And beneath it all, a storm quietly forming in the shadows. The morning after the tragedy, the apartment complex felt unnervingly still. Police cars lined the parking lot, lights flashing softly against the faded paint of the buildings. Neighbors stood behind cracked doors and curtains, whispering, wondering how a quiet night in Acolona had transformed into something so devastating. Detectives stepped inside the apartment, and immediately, a single question echoed through the room and across the investigation. How did this happen?
22-year-old Jasmine Brown was charged this morning with 2 counts of complicity to murder and 1 count of stolen property, a firearm. The shooting happened on the morning of September 29th. Court documents cite Brown in direct communication with 3 people who allegedly killed her 2 roommates while they were sleeping. During her hearing, the judge agreed to increase her bond from $250,000 to $1 million, saying she presents a danger.
It is the county's motion to set the bond at $1 million full cash plus HIP if posted. We deem her to be a significant danger at this time.
Okay, I agree with the county. She presents a danger, and the bond will be increased to $1 million plus HIP.
There you go. Brown was arrested Monday, pleading not guilty today during her arraignment. Again, she's currently being held in the Louisville jail.
At first, all anyone could see were the heartbreaking results. But the investigators knew that answers were buried somewhere beneath the timeline, the witness statements, and the digital trail that every person leaves behind. And as they began to gather those clues, the story that had once seemed random began to take a darker, more deliberate shape. It didn't happen suddenly. It unfolded piece by piece, like a puzzle slowly revealing an image no one wanted to see.
A judge quadrupled the bond for a 22-year-old suspect in a double homicide. LMPD arrested Jasmine Brown yesterday. The shooting happened September 29th at an apartment complex on Napa Valley Court in Okolona. An arrest citation says Brown was involved in planning the shooting that killed Kavion Faulkner and Marion Caldwell. The report says she's the victim's roommate. Brown is charged with 2 counts of murder and receiving a stolen gun. The judge set her bond at $1 million.
It's here at the 800 building in downtown where detectives say Jasmine Brown was helping her friend with her baby during the double murders that were taking place at her home in Okolona. They say while she did not pull the trigger, they believe she played a big role in setting up the murders.
She said that my house is getting ready to be on the news.
22-year-old Jasmine Brown was in court Thursday. She's accused of helping plan the murders of Marion Caldwell and Kavion Faulkner at her Falcon Crest apartment in Okolona. Homicide detective Brad Russell testified witnesses tie Brown to the murders.
She saw two males that had ski mask on in the FaceTime call. And then at the end of the conversation, she heard Miss Brown say, "They're asleep, the door is unlocked. Go ahead and go on in."
He also says a series of jail phone calls also link Brown to the case. Those calls are between Brown and her boyfriend Clifton Jones, who's locked up on a manslaughter charge. In a call on September 13th,
she stated to Mr. Jones, Miss Brown did, she doesn't love them like that. She's not going to risk what she's getting ready to have done to them. And then stated, if I loved them like that, I wouldn't be getting ready to backdoor them.
he says backdoor is street slang for setting someone up. They say in later calls, Brown told Jones that Caldwell had been talking badly about him, and by September 29th, the plan was carried out. Brown attorneys, however, argued she was manipulated.
You have no reason to believe that Jasmine Brown, at any point in time, had a gun in her hand and fired a gun, do you?
No.
You have no reason to believe that she was there when this occurred.
Correct.
And in fact, she was not even near the scene when this occurred.
Yes, I think it's fair to say yes.
She also argued to have Brown's bond reduced.
Judge, as a mother, all she wants to do is get home to her child.
But the judge kept bond at $1 million and sent Brown's case to the grand jury. DeAndrea Turner, WLKY.
The first major breakthrough came from a phone. Not the victims' phones, but the device belonging to the woman who had lived with them. Investigators found messages, call logs, and contacts that didn't match the behavior of someone caught off guard. Instead, they pointed to communication with 3 individuals outside the home. Individuals who had no clear reason to know the layout of the apartment, the timing of who was home, or how to enter quietly. But someone inside did. Authorities discovered conversations, some from days earlier, containing phrases that stood out sharply. One phrase in particular, mentioned during a recorded call weeks before the tragedy, caught investigators by surprise. It hinted at intent, it hinted at planning, and it hinted at knowledge the victims never had access to. Piece by piece, the narrative shifted. What was first believed to be an external attack now appeared to include an internal role, someone who knew the victims' routines, who understood their trust, and who might have provided information that only a housemate could know. As word of this possibility spread among friends and family of Marion and Kavion, the emotional fallout became overwhelming. Their loved ones were already grieving 2 bright young men whose lives were cut short. But learning that the danger may have come from someone they shared space with, that was a different kind of pain. It wasn't just loss. It was betrayal layered onto heartbreak. Meanwhile, police zeroed in on the phone records. They discovered communication not only on the night of the tragedy, but earlier, suggesting conversations about timing, access, and what could be removed from the apartment. A message about getting things out suddenly carried a new weight. A delayed plan took on new meaning. And the pattern investigators saw was no coincidence. The woman at the center of the investigation was arrested weeks later, and when she entered the courtroom for the bond hearing, the atmosphere was thick with disbelief. A judge who reviewed the early evidence didn't hesitate. Her bond was increased dramatically, signaling how seriously the court viewed the case. Still, questions swirled. Why did this happen? What was the motive? Who else was involved? Answers didn't come easily. But one thing became undeniable. The tragedy at Napa Valley Court wasn't the result of a sudden moment. It was the product of a plan, one that left a community shaken, investigators determined, and families forever changed. The courtroom was silent, one of those deep, heavy silences where even the sound of footsteps feels out of place. Family members of Marion Caldwell and Kavion Faulkner filled the seats, holding one another, waiting for answers that could never undo the pain. On the other side sat the woman accused of helping orchestrate the tragedy. Someone who once shared the same kitchen, the same hallways, and the same roof with the victims. This was the moment where all the tangled threads of the investigation met. When the judge entered, the shift in the room was palpable. Every person leaned forward. For weeks, detectives had pieced together messages, calls, and timelines. The evidence, still unfolding, was enough to move the case forward, enough for prosecutors to argue that what happened wasn't random, and enough for the court to treat it with the utmost seriousness. The judge reviewed the details, the digital logs, and the conversations uncovered by investigators. And then, with a firm voice that echoed through the courtroom, he raised her bond dramatically. It was a sharp, decisive moment, a sign that the justice system recognized the level of the betrayal and the weight of 2 young lives lost. For the families, it wasn't closure, but it was the first step toward accountability. Outside the courthouse, media cameras captured the emotions. Quiet tears, long embraces, and the exhaustion of people who had endured weeks of unanswered questions. Friends shared stories about Marion's humor and Kavion's dreams, reminders that these were not just names in a report. They were sons, brothers, friends, boys whose futures were just beginning. Meanwhile, the investigation pressed on. Detectives continued combing through digital evidence, looking for every link, every connection, every person who might have been involved. Prosecutors prepared for the grand jury, where the next phase of justice would be determined. And although one arrest had been made, the search for the full truth was far from over. But amidst the legal process, something deeper unfolded, an emotional reckoning. For the community, this case became a sobering reminder that danger can sometimes come from the last place we expect. For young people living with roommates or friends, it sparked uncomfortable questions about trust and intuition. And for the families of Marion and Kavion, the loss created a void that no verdict could ever fill. Still, their story began to serve a purpose. Neighbors came together. Conversations about safety, accountability, and awareness grew louder. And in telling their story, carefully, respectfully, truthfully, people ensured that Marion and Kavion wouldn't just be remembered for how their lives ended, but for the light they carried while they were here. And now, their story reaches you. 2 young men whose dreams were cut short, a betrayal no one saw coming, an investigation that revealed the hidden layers of trust, danger, and human choices, and a justice system continuing the long fight to bring answers to those left behind. Before we close, I want to leave you with a question. How well do we truly know the people we allow into our most private spaces? It's a question that this case forces all of us to reflect on. If you believe stories like theirs deserve to be told with respect and truth, please like this video, leave a comment, and share your thoughts below. And if you want to see more stories that reveal the hidden realities behind everyday life, subscribe to the channel so you never miss what comes next. Rest in peace, Marion Caldwell and Kavion Faulkner. Your story lives on.